A prestigious chef is hired to cater Manhattan's wedding of the year, but when the bride discovers a dark secret about her future family, they form an unexpected alliance that will shake the city's elite to its core. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Are you absolutely certain about this request? Rachel Harper's voice echoed through her office at Harper & Rye, her finger hovering over the email on her tablet. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her acclaimed Manhattan restaurant, highlighting the numerous awards adorning the walls. Sarah, her assistant manager, nodded enthusiastically. "The Pierce family specifically requested you," their event planner said, and I quote, "Only New York's finest chef will do for Manhattan's wedding of the year." Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she set down her tablet. The name, Pierce, sent a familiar ache through her chest, but surely it couldn't be related to him. New York was full of Pierces after all. "Did they mention any specific details about the couple?" she asked, aiming for casual indifference. "Oh yes. It's for Nathan Pierce, the real estate mogul's son. He's marrying some socialite named Olivia Walsh. It's been all over page 6. The rest of Sarah's words faded into white noise. Rachel gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles turning white. Nathan. After 5 years, that name still had the power to knock the wind from her lungs. "Rachel? Are you okay? You look pale." Forcing a smile, Rachel straightened in her chair. "I'm fine. Just surprised by the scale of the event." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "Could you give me a moment? I need to review the details." Once alone, Rachel closed her eyes, memories flooding back unbidden. Nathan's laughing face as they planned their future restaurant together. The warmth of his hands as they cooked side by side in culinary school. The devastation in his eyes when his father showed them both the medical reports, the fraudulent papers claiming she could never have children. Her hand instinctively moved to her bottom desk drawer, where she kept a worn photograph. She hadn't looked at it in months, but she knew every detail by heart. A small boy with Nathan's eyes and her smile, hidden away at her sister's home in Connecticut. The soft chime of her phone interrupted her reverie. A new email from the Pierce wedding planner, requesting an in-person meeting with the bride tomorrow morning. Rachel's finger hovered over the decline button. She had built Harper & Rye from nothing after Nathan left, transforming her heartbreak into a temple of culinary excellence. Taking this job would mean facing him again, facing his father. But something else stirred within her, a fierce pride. Let them see what she had become. Let William Pierce witness the success of the woman he had tried to destroy. She pressed, accept. The next morning, Rachel arranged her private tasting room with meticulous care. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the crystal glasses and silver cutlery she'd selected for the presentation. Everything had to be perfect. The door opened precisely at 10 and Rachel turned to greet her client. The woman who entered wasn't what she expected. Olivia Walsh carried herself with quiet confidence rather than the socialite arrogance Rachel had anticipated. Her dark eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in the room. "Ms. Walsh, welcome to Harper & Rye. Please call me Olivia." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I have to admit, I specifically requested you for this tasting." Rachel's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Oh, yes." Olivia settled into one of the chairs, her gaze direct and knowing. "You see, I've spent the last few months learning everything I can about the Pierce family. It's interesting how many photographs had to be removed from their family albums. Especially ones from Nathan's culinary school days." The air in the room seemed to thin. Rachel's heart pounded against her ribs as Olivia reached into her bag and withdrew a folded magazine article. A yellowed review of a pop-up restaurant from 6 years ago, featuring a photo of Rachel and Nathan standing close together in a kitchen, their faces bright with promise and love. "I think," Olivia said softly, "we have a lot to discuss about the Pierce family. And I don't mean the wedding menu." "This is exquisite," Nathan murmured, closing his eyes as he savored the bite of seared scallop. The citrus notes with the brown butter, it's somehow familiar. Rachel's hands trembled slightly behind her back as she stood at the head of the private dining room. She'd deliberately chosen this dish. It was the first recipe they perfected together in culinary school, though she'd added refinements over the years. "It's a specialty of the house," she said neutrally, avoiding his gaze. William Pierce set down his fork with a sharp clink. "I believe we should consider other catering options," he announced, his voice carrying the same commanding tone Rachel remembered from 5 years ago. "Perhaps Le Cirque." "Dad." Nathan's voice held a warning. "We agreed Olivia would make the final decision about the catering. Rachel risked a glance at Olivia, who sat beside Nathan, watching the scene unfold with calculating eyes. Their conversation from yesterday hung between them like an unspoken pact. "I think Rachel's menu is perfect," Olivia said smoothly, placing her hand over Nathan's. "The way she combines traditional elegance with modern innovation. It's exactly what we want for our wedding." Her eyes met Rachel's with subtle emphasis on the word, "our." The next course arrived, butter-poached lobster with truffle risotto. As Rachel's staff arranged the plates, William Pierce pushed his chair back and stood. "Ms. Harper, a word?" It wasn't a request. In the hallway, William's facade of civility dropped. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. Name your price." Rachel lifted her chin. "I'm not playing any game, Mr. Pierce. I'm running my business. A business that could suffer greatly from the right whispers in the right ears." His smile was cold. "I hear health department inspections can be quite thorough these days." "Father?" Nathan's voice cut through the tension. He stood in the doorway, his expression shifting between confusion and growing suspicion. "Is everything all right?" Rachel watched as William's demeanor transformed instantly, paternal concern replacing the threat. "Just discussing some logistics, son." Ms. Harper was explaining why her schedule might be too full to accommodate our event. "That's not what I heard," Olivia's voice came from behind Nathan. She held up her phone, the voice recorder app display clearly visible. William's face drained of color. "I think," Olivia continued pleasantly, "we should return to our tasting. Rachel has 3 more courses to present, and I'm particularly looking forward to the dessert." Back in the dining room, the tension crackled like static electricity. Nathan kept glancing between Rachel and his father, decades of buried questions beginning to surface in his eyes. When Rachel presented the dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart with lavender honey, his sharp intake of breath was audible. "This is," he started. "Your mother's recipe," Rachel finished quietly. With a few modern touches. William's hand tightened around his water glass. "Nathan, we should go. The real estate meeting is tomorrow," Olivia interrupted. "Nathan, didn't you tell me once that your mother loved to bake? Before she left?" Rachel's voice was soft but carried clearly. "Or before she was pushed away, Mr. Pierce? Like so many others who didn't fit your perfect plan?" The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan looked at his father, then at Rachel, years of carefully constructed narratives beginning to crack. After the Pierces left, Olivia lingered behind. She pulled a USB drive from her purse and placed it on the table. "Financial records," she said quietly. "Shell companies. Bribes to doctors. And a very interesting paper trail regarding Nathan's mother's voluntary departure to Switzerland." She smiled grimly. "It seems William Pierce has a habit of removing inconvenient women from his son's life." Rachel picked up the drive, her heart pounding. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I was supposed to be another perfect piece in William Pierce's empire. Instead, I'm going to help burn it down." Olivia gathered her coat. "Starting with my wedding. Check your email. I'm about to send you the guest list. All the most important people in Manhattan will be there to witness William Pierce's carefully constructed world collapse." After Olivia left, Rachel sat alone in the private dining room, the USB drive heavy in her hand. Through the window she could see the Pierce building towering over the Manhattan skyline, a monument to power and control. For the first time in 5 years she allowed herself to imagine watching it crumble. She opened her laptop and began to plan the wedding menu. Each dish would be a memory, a story, a weapon disguised as celebration. William Pierce had used her love of food to drive her away once. Now she would use it to serve him the justice he deserved. And Nathan. Rachel touched her phone, looking at the new text from her sister. A photo of a little boy playing with toy cooking utensils, his father's eyes bright with excitement as he mimicked the chefs he saw on TV. Soon, she thought. Soon the truth would be served, and not even William Pierce could send it back to the kitchen. "I was already 2 months pregnant when William showed us the medical records." Rachel's words hung in the air of her darkened restaurant. It was well past midnight and she sat across from Olivia in a corner booth, a bottle of untouched wine between them. The USB drive lay on the table like a loaded gun. "The irony was," Rachel continued, her fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass, "I just found out that morning. I was planning to tell Nathan that night at dinner. Instead," she took a shaky breath. "Instead, William called an emergency family meeting." Olivia leaned forward, her face illuminated by the dim bar lights. "Tell me everything." William had arranged it perfectly. A respected fertility specialist, paid off, of course. medical records that looked impeccable, all showing I had a condition that made pregnancy impossible. Rachel's laugh was bitter. He even had pamphlets about adoption alternatives ready, as if he'd ever let Nathan adopt. But why? Olivia asked. Why go to such lengths? Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Pierce Hotels to merge with Maxwell Resorts, Dynasty in the Making. William had arranged Nathan's entire life since birth. The right schools, the right career path, and eventually the right marriage. To Caroline Maxwell, heiress to the Maxwell Hotel empire. Rachel's voice hardened. A chef from Brooklyn with student loans didn't fit that narrative. But Nathan left the hotel business, Olivia said. He started his own real estate development company. After I was gone. After William's perfect plan fell apart. Rachel pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over a photo she rarely allowed herself to look at. Would you like to meet my son? Olivia's sharp intake of breath at the photo was audible. He has Nathan's eyes. And his father's passion for cooking. Rachel smiled sadly. James spends hours watching cooking shows, recreating recipes with his play kitchen. My sister says he's already better at plating than some professionals. Your sister raised him as her own. As far as the world knows, James is her son. It was the only way to keep him safe from William's influence. Rachel's voice cracked. The hardest decision I've ever made. Olivia reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick folder. Maybe this will make that decision a little easier to bear. She spread documents across the table. William Pierce's complete financial history for the past 20 years. Every bribe, every blackmail, every destroyed career of anyone who stood in his way. Rachel's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. How did you get these? Let's just say William isn't the only one who knows how to pay for information. The difference is I have actual proof of his crimes, not fabricated medical records. Olivia's smile was sharp. Did you know he's been embezzling from Nathan's company? Millions siphoned off through shell corporations, all while pretending to be the proud, supportive father. Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for a particular document. This doctor's name. Dr. Harrison. He was the one who showed you those fake medical records? Yes. And look at the wire transfers to his offshore account the week before your diagnosis. Olivia tapped the paper. $2 million to destroy your future. Rachel stood abruptly, walking to the restaurant's window. The Pierce building loomed in the distance, its windows still lit despite the late hour. Nathan deserves to know the truth. About everything. He will. Olivia joined her at the window. But we have to be smart about this. William has spent decades building his web of lies. We need to destroy it all at once, so thoroughly that he can't spin his way out. The wedding, Rachel said softly. When everyone who matters in Manhattan is there to witness it. Exactly. Olivia's reflection smiled in the glass. But first, I need you to tell me everything about Nathan's mother. The transfers to Switzerland are just the beginning. I think William's pattern of controlling Nathan's life started long before you. Rachel turned from the window, her chef's instincts taking over. We'll need coffee for this conversation. And maybe something stronger. As she moved to the kitchen, Rachel caught her reflection in the polished steel of the prep station. For 5 years, she'd carried these secrets like stones in her pockets, weighing her down. Now, finally, she could feel them transforming into weapons. In the dining room, Olivia spread more documents across the table, building their case against William Pierce piece by piece. The truth, Rachel thought as she prepared 2 Irish coffees, was like a fine reduction sauce. The longer it simmered, the more powerful it became. And soon, very soon, William Pierce would get a taste of everything he tried to keep buried. Every moment needs to be choreographed perfectly, Olivia said, arranging color-coded note cards across Rachel's office desk. The wedding schedule gives us exactly 3 opportunities to strike. Rachel studied the cards, her chef's mind automatically translating the timing into service intervals. The cocktail hour, the main reception, and the toast. Exactly. Olivia placed 3 USB drives beside the cards. Different revelations for different moments. But we need to be careful. William will be watching both of us. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Harper and Rye, catching the metal surfaces of the kitchen beyond the office. The restaurant wouldn't open for hours, but Rachel's staff could be heard prepping for the day, their routine a counterpoint to this clandestine meeting. I've been thinking about Nathan's mother, Rachel said quietly. The timing of her departure to Switzerland matches another merger William was orchestrating. The Westbrook acquisition. Olivia nodded. I found the prenuptial agreement she never signed. She was threatening to expose William's illegal dealings with the board. A knock at the office door made both women jump. Sarah, Rachel's assistant, poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Nathan Pierce is here. He's asking to speak with you, Rachel. Rachel and Olivia exchanged alarmed looks. I'll use the back exit, Olivia whispered, gathering the note cards. Remember, don't let him see how much we know. Not yet. Moments later, Rachel found Nathan waiting in the dining room, studying the wall of awards. He turned at her approach, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. The lemon tart, he said without preamble. Mom's recipe. You remembered. Some recipes stay with you, Rachel replied carefully. I've been having dreams, Nathan continued, moving closer. About the old days. About us in culinary school. Something feels wrong about how it ended. Rachel's pulse quickened. Nathan. The medical records, he pressed. I never got a copy. Dad handled everything. He always handles everything. His laugh was hollow. Did you know he's trying to merge my company with Maxwell Development? The same company he wanted me to merge with 5 years ago through marriage. History repeating itself? Rachel kept her voice neutral. Maybe. Or maybe it never stopped being history. He ran a hand through his hair. Rachel, I need to know. The sharp click of expensive shoes on hardwood interrupted them. William Pierce strode into the restaurant like he owned it, his smile as artificial as the sweetener in his morning coffee. Nathan's son. The contractors are waiting at the site. His tone was pleasant, but his eyes were steel when they landed on Rachel. Ms. Harper and I need to discuss some catering details. Nathan hesitated, looking between them. For a moment, Rachel thought he might refuse to leave. But years of conditioning won out. We'll talk later, he promised Rachel, then left. As soon as Nathan was gone, William's demeanor changed. He pulled a thick envelope from his suit jacket. $1 million. Good. Walk away from the wedding contract. Rachel didn't even glance at the envelope. No. $2 million then. And my guarantee that your special family situation in Connecticut remains private. Ice flooded Rachel's veins. Are you threatening my son? I'm protecting mine. William placed the envelope on a table. You have until tomorrow to decide. After that, things become unpleasant. He smiled thinly. I hear Child Protective Services can be quite thorough in their investigations. Anonymous tips about unfit mothers can be so damaging. After he left, Rachel sank into a chair, her hands shaking. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Olivia. He knows about James. We need to accelerate the plan. The response came immediately. Check your email. Proof of William's involvement in Nathan's mother's accident in Switzerland. If he wants to play with threats, let's show him how it's done. Rachel opened the attached files, her horror growing with each document. The investigation reports, the payoffs, the covered-up death made to look like a skiing accident. For 20 years, William had buried this truth. She looked at the envelope of cash he'd left, then at her phone's background, James smiling at the camera, flour on his nose from attempting his first cookies. The image steeled her resolve. Standing, Rachel walked to her kitchen where her staff was prepping for service. Change of plans today, she announced. We're testing every recipe for the Pierce wedding. I want each dish to be unforgettable. Her smile held an edge sharper than her best knife. After all, this will be a wedding everyone remembers. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with another text from Olivia. Nathan just called. He's asking questions about his mother. The cracks are showing. Rachel picked up a lemon, remembering the tart that had triggered Nathan's memories. Sometimes the simplest ingredients could unravel the most complex deceptions. She began to zest, each stroke precise and purposeful. The recipe for revenge, she was learning, required perfect timing, exact measurements, and most importantly, the courage to turn up the heat. Rachel stood in her walk-in cooler, surrounded by wedding prep, each container carefully labeled for the upcoming Pierce celebration. Her hands moved automatically, checking temperatures and freshness, but her mind was elsewhere, specifically on the photo Nathan had texted her last night. It was an old picture from their culinary school days. Rachel teaching a cooking class for underprivileged kids, Nathan beside her, both of them laughing as a young student attempted to flip an omelet. The caption read simply, "Remember when our dreams were simpler?" She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo again. They had planned to open a cooking school together, combining Nathan's business acumen with her culinary skills. Before William Pierce decided that dreams needed to align with profit margins. You're hiding in the cooler again. Rachel turned to find her head chef, Marcus, standing in the doorway. Just checking prep. For the third time today. He raised an eyebrow. The same prep that you triple-checked yesterday. Want to talk about what's really going on? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Emergency. Come to the Hemingway bar. Now. 20 minutes later, Rachel slipped into a dimly lit booth where Olivia waited, a manila envelope on the table between them. Look at this, Olivia said without preamble, spreading documents across the table. Bank transfers from 5 years ago. The exact amount William offered you yesterday. Rachel's hands shook as she read. He tried to pay off 3 other women before me? All of them connected to Nathan? His college girlfriend, his first business partner, and the daughter of his mentor at the real estate firm. Olivia's voice was grim. All driven away by William's generous severance packages when they didn't fit his plan. But why show me this now? We already know William's manipulative. Because of this. Olivia pulled out one final document. Nathan's been investigating too. He hired a private detective last month. He's getting close to uncovering everything on his own. Rachel sat back, the implications hitting her. If Nathan discovered the truth himself, their carefully planned revenge would collapse. But more importantly, he's trying to understand his past. He's actually questioning his father. Which means our plan might destroy more than just William. Olivia's usual confidence wavered. Nathan's not just a pawn anymore. He's fighting his own battles. Rachel's phone chimed again, another text from Nathan. Found Mom's old recipe box. The lemon tart recipe isn't there. Dad said she took all her recipes when she left, but you knew it by heart. How? He's remembering, Rachel whispered. Everything we planned to expose, he's starting to see it himself. So what do we do? Olivia asked. Stop the plan? Before Rachel could answer, the bar's door opened and Nathan himself walked in. Both women froze, but he didn't notice them in the dark booth. He sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and pulled out what Rachel recognized as his mother's old recipe journal. I can't do this, Rachel said suddenly. Not like this. He deserves to hear the truth from me first. Rachel, wait, but she was already moving. She slid onto the bar stool next to Nathan. He didn't seem surprised to see her. I knew you'd be here, he said quietly. This was where we had our first date. Nathan. The recipe, he continued. You knew it because Mom taught it to you herself, didn't she? That summer before she went to Switzerland. The summer Dad was pushing me to propose to Caroline Maxwell. Rachel's heart pounded. Yes. She was going to expose him, wasn't she? His business dealings. The fraud. Everything. His knuckles were white around his glass. And then she had her accident. Nathan, there's something else you need to know. The bar's door opened again, and William Pierce's commanding presence filled the room. But this time, Nathan didn't move to leave. Instead, he pulled out his phone and played a recording. William's voice threatening Rachel in her restaurant. No more lies, Dad, Nathan said without turning around. I want the truth. All of it. William's face went pale, then red. Son, whatever you think you know. Mr. Pierce. Rachel's voice cut through the tension. I believe it's time we all had a real conversation. About the past, about your grandchild, and about exactly what's going to happen at this wedding. The recipe journal lay open on the bar, pages filled with a dead woman's handwriting. Recipes and secrets, Rachel thought, both had a way of surviving despite attempts to bury them. And sometimes the truth was its own form of revenge. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing at Harper and Rye, the restaurant closed to all but the wedding party and their closest guests. Rachel moved through her kitchen like a conductor, orchestrating the service of each course with precise timing. Everything was perfect, except for the text she just received from her sister. Emergency. Babysitter canceled. Have to bring James to the restaurant. Almost there. Rachel's hands trembled as she plated the next course. After her confrontation with Nathan at the bar, they'd reached an uneasy truce. He knew there was more to the story, but had agreed to wait until after the rehearsal dinner for the full truth. Now fate was about to force her hand. Rachel. Olivia appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face tense. William is making a toast. He's talking about Nathan's mother. In the dining room, William Pierce stood, champagne glass raised. My late wife would have loved to see this day, he was saying, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity that Rachel had come to despise. She always wanted Nathan to find the right partner, someone from a good family. The kitchen door swung open. Mommy? Time seemed to stop. A small boy with Nathan's eyes and Rachel's smile burst into the room, wearing a mini chef's coat and trailing Rachel's harried-looking sister behind him. "I'm so sorry," her sister gasped. "He ran ahead when he saw you through the window," but Rachel barely heard her. She was watching Nathan, who had turned at the child's voice. She saw the exact moment recognition hit him. The widening of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath, the champagne glass slipping from his fingers to shatter on the floor. "James," Rachel said softly, pulling her son close. "What have I told you about running in kitchens? That it's dangerous and unprofessional," the boy recited, then turned to the stunned room with a bright smile. "I'm going to be a chef like my mom. Want to see my knife skills? I can julienne carrots." William Pierce's face had gone the color of old ash. "Nathan, son." But Nathan was already moving, crossing the room in long strides. He knelt before James, his hands shaking as he reached out, then stopped just short of touching him. "Julienne carrots?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That's pretty advanced for someone your age." "Mom says I'm a natural," James beamed. "Just like she was in culinary school. That's where she learned from her partner. They were going to open a cooking school together, but..." He frowned. "Mom gets sad when she talks about that part." Nathan looked up at Rachel, tears in his eyes. "5 years?" he whispered. "He's 5 years old." "Nathan." William's voice cracked like a whip. "This is clearly some sort of manipulation." "He has your mother's hands," Rachel said quietly to Nathan. "The way he holds a knife, the precision. I noticed it the first time he helped me cook." Olivia stepped forward, placing a USB drive on the table. "Would you like to see the real medical records, Nathan? The ones from 5 years ago showing Rachel was pregnant? Or perhaps the bank statements showing how much your father paid Dr. Harrison to fabricate the infertility diagnosis?" The room had gone deathly quiet. The wedding guests watched the scene unfold like a high-stakes theater production. "I think," Nathan said, not taking his eyes off James, "that the rehearsal dinner is over." He finally reached out, gently touching his son's cheek. "Would you like to show me those knife skills?" "Nathan," William tried again. "You can't possibly believe." "Actually, Dad, I believe everything now. The medical records I could never see. Mom's convenient accidents. The way every person I've ever truly cared about somehow ended up being wrong for me." Nathan stood, lifting James into his arms with natural ease. "But right now, I'm going to spend some time with my son." "In my office," Rachel said. "There's a practice station set up there. He likes to pretend it's his own restaurant." As Nathan carried James away, the boy chattering excitedly about his favorite recipes, William Pierce made one last desperate play. "This will ruin everything. The merger, your future." "No, Dad," Nathan turned back. "This just saved everything." He looked at Rachel. "We have a lot to talk about." "Yes," she said. "We do." After they left, Olivia approached William, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "The real question, Mr. Pierce, is what else might come out at tomorrow's wedding. Perhaps it's time to renegotiate some terms." Rachel watched William's face as he realized his carefully constructed world was crumbling. In the kitchen, she could hear James's delighted laugh mixing with Nathan's deeper chuckle as they presumably discussed proper knife technique. Some dishes, she thought, were worth the wait to serve. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with crystal and candlelight, the wedding reception in full swing. Rachel stood in the kitchen, watching her staff plate the main course while her mind drifted to the scene upstairs just hours earlier. "I can't go through with it," Olivia had said, still in her wedding dress. "Not after seeing Nathan with James. This isn't about revenge anymore." Now, as Rachel oversaw the service, she caught glimpses of Nathan at the head table, his seat conspicuously empty beside him where a bride should have been. The whispers had already started among the guests. Manhattan's wedding of the year had become its scandal of the decade. William Pierce worked the room desperately, trying to control the narrative. "Just pre-wedding jitters," she heard him tell one group of investors. "Olivia's just taking a moment." The sound system crackled to life, cutting him off. Olivia's voice filled the ballroom. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for my absence, but I think it's time you all knew the truth about William Pierce and the real cost of his empire." On the massive screens meant for wedding photos, documents began to appear. Bank statements, medical records, police reports from Switzerland. "Nathan," Olivia's voice continued, "your mother didn't leave voluntarily. She didn't die in a skiing accident. These are the real reports your father buried." The room erupted in gasps as photos appeared. Nathan's mother with a young Rachel at a cooking class, hospital records showing Rachel's pregnancy, Transfer receipts of William's payoffs to doctors and investigators. William lunged for the AV controls, but Rachel's staff, carefully briefed by Olivia, blocked his path. 4 years, Olivia's voice went on, William Pierce has orchestrated every aspect of his son's life, eliminating anyone who threatened his control. Ask Caroline Maxwell about the merger that never happened. Ask Rachel Harper about the medical records that were fabricated. Ask the Swiss police about the investigation that was buried. Nathan stood slowly, his eyes fixed on his father. Is this why you insisted on handling Mom's funeral arrangements? Why there was never a body to bury? Son, William's voice cracked. Everything I did was for you? No. Rachel stepped out of the kitchen. Everything you did was for control. She nodded to Marcus, who wheeled out a special serving cart. On it sat a simple lemon tart, but not just any lemon tart. Beside it was a handwritten recipe card, the paper yellowed with age. Your wife wrote this recipe the day she discovered your first embezzlement, Rachel said quietly. She told me about it the day she taught me to make it. She said she was gathering evidence, planning to expose you. 3 days later, she died in Switzerland. Nathan picked up the recipe card, his hands trembling. On the back, in faded ink, was a note. Nathan, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from him. But I found someone who loves cooking as much as we do. Trust her. Love, Mom. The screens above flickered again, showing new documents. William's recent threats against Rachel, transcripts of his attempts to bribe her, and finally, a photo that made the room gasp. William meeting with known criminals in Switzerland days before his wife's accident. Enough. William shouted. This is all fabricated. Actually, a new voice cut in, it's not. A man in a dark suit stepped forward. Agent Phillips, FBI. Mr. Pierce, we've been building this case for quite some time. Ms. Walsh's evidence was very helpful in filling in the final pieces. As the agents moved to surround William, Nathan turned to Rachel. You could have exposed this at any time. Why wait? Because you needed to see the truth for yourself, she said softly. And because. She gestured to the doorway where James stood in his mini chef's coat, held back by Rachel's sister. Nathan's face softened. Our son needs to know that sometimes the truth is worth waiting for. He knelt down, beckoning James over. Hey chef, want to help me taste this lemon tart? I hear it's a very special recipe. As father and son shared their first dessert together, Rachel watched William being led away in handcuffs. The mighty Pierce empire was crumbling, but something far more valuable was being built in its place. Olivia appeared beside her, having slipped into the hotel through the service entrance. She changed from her wedding dress into a simple black suit. Not quite the wedding we planned, she said with a slight smile. No, Rachel agreed, watching Nathan teach James how to properly appreciate the subtle flavors of his grandmother's recipe. It's better. The guests were still murmuring, phones were still recording, and tomorrow the scandal would rock Manhattan's elite to its core. But in that moment, as 3 generations of cooking legacy came together over a simple lemon tart, Rachel finally felt the bitter taste of the past dissolve into something sweeter. Sometimes, she thought, the best recipes were the ones you never planned to make. The morning after the wedding that never was, Manhattan's social media exploded. #Pierce Family Scandal trended nationwide, with video clips from the reception spreading like wildfire. Rachel sat in her quiet restaurant, scrolling through the headlines on her tablet. Pierce empire built on lies. FBI investigation reveals decades of fraud. Runaway bride exposes family crimes. Wedding becomes crime scene. Manhunting millionaire's hidden son revealed. The door chimed and Nathan walked in, looking exhausted but somehow lighter. The FBI just finished questioning me. 6 hours of going through every business deal my father ever pushed me into. He sat heavily at the bar. Turns out I've been an unwitting accomplice to fraud for years. Nathan. No, let me finish. He pulled out a worn envelope. I found this in his office last night. It's a letter from Mom, dated the day before she died. She knew he was planning something. She tried to warn me. His voice cracked. All these years I thought she abandoned us. The kitchen door swung open and James bounded out, flour dusting his chef's coat. Dad, you have to see what I made. Mom's been teaching me how to make croissants. Nathan's face transformed, grief giving way to joy. Show me, chef. As James dragged Nathan to the kitchen, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Turn on CNN. The scene that filled her tablet screen showed William Pierce being led from his penthouse in handcuffs, his usual polished appearance disheveled. But it was his expression that caught Rachel's attention. The mask of control had finally cracked. revealing the desperate man beneath. "I did everything for this family," he was shouting at the cameras. Nathan was weak just like his mother. Someone had to make the hard decisions. The feed cut to a press conference where Nathan's statement was being read by his lawyer. The Pierce Development Corporation will be undergoing complete restructuring. All projects will be audited, and we will work with authorities to make restitution to any parties harmed by the previous management's actions. Rachel's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her sister. "Have you seen page 6? They're calling it Manhattan's greatest takedown." From the kitchen came the sound of laughter. Rachel walked over to find Nathan and James bent over the prep table, for generations of Pierce family recipes spread out before them. Nathan was teaching his son how to properly laminate dough, his hands gentle as he guided the boy's movements. "Your grandmother," Nathan was saying, "she used to say that baking was like love, it needed patience, attention, and just the right amount of heat. Is that why you and Mom are going to make a cooking school?" James asked innocently. Nathan looked up at Rachel, surprise and hope mingling in his expression. "Are we?" Before she could answer, the door chimed again. Olivia walked in carrying a thick folder. "The board of directors just had an emergency meeting," she announced. "They voted to remove William from all positions and freeze his assets." She smiled. "They're also very interested in supporting any new ventures that might help rebuild the Pierce family's reputation." "Something about a cooking school?" "Using the money he stole to create something good," Rachel mused. "That would be quite the turnaround." Speaking of turnarounds, Olivia set down another folder. "These are for you, Nathan. The FBI found them in your father's private safe. Your mother's original journals, including her notes about his illegal activities. She was building a case against him, working with a journalist." She paused. "A journalist who mysteriously disappeared in Switzerland around the same time she did." Nathan's hands tightened on the rolling pin. "All this time she was trying to protect me, to expose him. And he stopped, looking at James. And he took away the chance for me to know the truth, to know my son." "But now you do," Rachel said softly. "And James has quite a few opinions about proper kitchen organization that I think his grandmother would have appreciated." "The timeline's wrong," James declared very seriously. "My son place should be at the beginning of prep, not during. It's inefficient." Nathan laughed, tears in his eyes. "Definitely your grandmother's grandson." He looked at Rachel. "So, about this cooking school?" "First," Olivia interrupted, "you might want to see what your father just posted on social media. His last act before they took his phone." The post was brief but devastating. "Nathan is no son of mine. The Pierce legacy dies with me." "No," Nathan said, watching James carefully fold his dough, "it doesn't. It's just taking a new form." He picked up one of his mother's recipes. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying something old, but building something new." Outside, reporters were gathering, drawn by the news that Nathan Pierce was at Harper & Rye. But inside, a family was slowly rebuilding, one recipe at a time. And in a high-security holding cell, William Pierce was learning the hardest lesson of all. Some things couldn't be controlled, bought, or buried. Sometimes the truth, like a well-proofed dough, would always rise. The autumn sun streamed through the windows of Harper & Rye, catching the dust motes in the air as Rachel watched James demonstrate his latest culinary creation to Nathan. "The secret," James explained with all the gravity a 5-year-old could muster, "is to put the cheese inside the burger before you cook it. Mom calls it a Juicy Lucy, but I call it a James special." Nathan nodded seriously, taking meticulous notes in what Rachel recognized as his mother's old recipe journal. "And the seasoning ratio? That's a family secret," James stage whispered, glancing at Rachel with a conspiratorial wink. 3 months had passed since the wedding, that wasn't. 3 months of headlines, investigations, and careful steps toward healing. Rachel watched as Nathan taught James how to properly shape the patty around the cheese, their matching expressions of concentration making her heart ache with a bittersweet joy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Greetings from New Zealand. Finally found what I was looking for, myself. P.S. The food here is amazing. You should consider opening a Pacific fusion restaurant next." Attached was a photo of Olivia on a mountainside, her smile more genuine than any Rachel had seen during the wedding preparations. After the scandal broke, Olivia had donated her portion of the settlement money to a foundation supporting victims of financial fraud and set off to explore the world. "Mom?" James called out. "Dad says we can convert the private dining room into a teaching kitchen. For the school. The cooking school." It had started as a casual mention but had grown into something real over the past months. The space next door to Harper and Rye had become available. The universe's way of offering a fresh start, Rachel thought. Speaking of the school, Nathan said, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel, the board approved our proposal this morning. They're calling it Community Restitution Through Culinary Education. He smiled wryly. Apparently, teaching underprivileged kids to cook is good PR for a company trying to rebuild its reputation. Rachel moved closer to the prep station, inhaling the familiar sense of seared beef and fresh herbs. And you're sure about this? Going into business together again? Actually, Nathan pulled out a folder. I was thinking something different this time. He spread out the documents, incorporation papers for a new business entity. The school would be yours. Fully funded but independently owned. I'll just be. He glanced at James, who was carefully plating his burger, an enthusiastic volunteer instructor. Rachel stared at the papers, understanding the gift he was offering. Not just money but freedom. Trust. A chance to build something without the weight of their past complications. I found more of Mom's journals, Nathan continued quietly. She wrote about her dreams for a cooking school. About making fine cuisine accessible to everyone, not just the elite. He swallowed hard. She would have loved teaching James. Try it. James interrupted, presenting his perfectly plated Juicy Lucy with a flourish worthy of a TV chef. I made it with 3 kinds of cheese. As they sat at the prep station together, sampling James's creation, Rachel felt the last bits of tension she'd been carrying begin to melt away. Like the cheese in the center of the burger, there was something warm and genuine at the heart of this moment. Oh, James suddenly exclaimed. I forgot to tell you. Ms. Rodriguez from school says I can do my show and tell about being a chef. Can I bring my special knives? Maybe we'll stick to your chef's coat and some non-sharp tools, Rachel laughed, catching Nathan's equally amused expression. Later that evening, after James had gone home with Rachel's sister for his regular Thursday sleepover, Nathan lingered in the restaurant. I've been thinking about names for the school, he said, running his hand along the smooth wood of the bar. What about Catherine's Kitchen? After Mom? Rachel smiled, remembering the woman who had taken her under her wing all those years ago, who had seen something special in a scholarship student from Brooklyn. I think she'd like that. Though James might insist on adding "and James's Kitchen" to it. He's got her spirit, Nathan said softly. That same passion for feeding people, making them happy through food. He looked at Rachel. Thank you. Not just for protecting him all these years, but for raising him to love this. To love what we loved. From her phone came another text from Olivia. Just heard about the school approval. Remember what you told me about revenge being a dish best served cold? Turns out healing is a dish best shared warm. Rachel looked around her restaurant, thinking about the changes coming. The private dining room would become a teaching kitchen. The next door space would fill with students. And somewhere, Catherine Pierce's recipes would find new life in the hands of her grandson. You know, Rachel said, James has been asking about your mother's lemon tart recipe. Maybe it's time we taught it to him together. Nathan's smile was answer enough. Sometimes, Rachel thought, the sweetest recipes were the ones that took the longest to perfect. And with the opening of Catherine's Kitchen, what message do you hope to send to the community? The reporter held her microphone toward James, who stood proudly in his chef's coat between Rachel and Nathan. That everyone deserves to learn how to make good food, the 6-year-old declared with authority. And that family recipes are special magic that should be shared. It was exactly 1 year since the failed Pierce wedding had exposed decades of corruption. The Manhattan food scene had gathered for the dual opening of Catherine's Kitchen cooking school and its adjoining restaurant, Second Chances. Both occupied the beautifully renovated space next to Harper and Rye, connected by a state-of-the-art teaching kitchen. Rachel watched as James led the cameras through the space, pointing out features with the confidence of a seasoned TV chef. This is where kids like me learn to cook. And over there is where my dad teaches business classes, because Mom says good food needs good planning. Speaking of planning, Nathan murmured in Rachel's ear, have you seen today's paper? The headline said it all. William Pierce sentenced, 20 years for fraud, conspiracy, and criminal negligence in wife's death. He finally confessed, Nathan continued, his voice tight. About Mom. About everything. The prosecutor says he's hoping for leniency, but... He shook his head. The evidence Olivia gathered was too thorough. As if summoned by her name, Olivia herself appeared in the doorway, tanned from her world travels and carrying a distinctive blue box. Sorry I'm late. But I brought macarons from Paris. Specifically, from that little place we talked about opening a franchise with. The past year had transformed Olivia. After exposing William, she'd used her settlement money to start a foundation helping women escape toxic relationships, all while pursuing her own passion for international cuisine. Her food blog, The Runaway Bride's Food Guide, had become a sensation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator called out, "if you'll gather in the main dining room, we're about to begin the opening ceremony." The space had been designed to honor its namesake. Catherine Pierce's recipes were framed on the walls, along with photos of her teaching at various community centers. Her original recipe journal occupied a place of honor in a display case, open to the famous lemon tart recipe that had started everything. "Mom would have loved this," Nathan said softly, taking in the crowd of students, chefs, and community members. Using the Pierce fortune to teach people to cook, it's exactly what she wanted. James tugged at Rachel's sleeve. "Can I show them my special dessert now?" Rachel nodded, and James proudly led the way to the dessert station. There, on a gleaming silver stand, sat an artfully plated lemon tart, but with a twist. "I added my own secret ingredient," James announced to the gathered crowd. "Because Grandma Catherine's recipe was perfect, but Dad says every chef needs their own signature. So I added a little bit of white chocolate to the filling, and see the design on top? It's the constellation Mom says Grandma loved. The Big Dipper." Nathan's hand found Rachel's as their son explained the technical aspects of pastry decoration to the amazed reporters. Around them, students from the first class at Catherine's kitchen served appetizers they'd learned to make, while the restaurant staff prepared for their first official service. "I got a letter from William yesterday," Nathan said quietly. "He wanted to know if he could see James. I haven't answered yet." "That's a decision for another day," Rachel replied. "Today is about new beginnings." The sound of a spoon tapping glass drew everyone's attention. Olivia stood on a chair, her smile bright. "A year ago we gathered for what we thought would be a wedding. Instead we witnessed the fall of an empire built on lies. But from those ashes, something remarkable has grown." She gestured to the space around them. "Catherine's Kitchen will offer free culinary education to underprivileged youth. Second Chances will provide graduates with their first professional kitchen experience. And the Pierce Foundation, under its new management, will ensure this is just the first of many such projects." She raised her glass. "To Catherine Pierce, whose recipes helped expose the truth. To James, who inherited her passion for teaching through food. And to Rachel and Nathan, who proved that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served to others with love and hope for the future." As applause filled the room, James tugged both his parents toward the kitchen. "Come on. The first class is about to start, and I promise to teach them how to make my special Juicy Lucy." Rachel and Nathan exchanged glances, remembering their own first cooking class together so many years ago. Now they were creating new memories, new recipes, new chances for others to find their passion. Outside, the sign for Second Chances caught the setting sun, its gold letters gleaming. Below it, a smaller plaque read, "In memory of Catherine Pierce, who taught us that the most important ingredient in any kitchen is love." Sometimes, Rachel thought, watching her son demonstrate the proper way to seal cheese inside a burger patty, the sweetest revenge was living well and passing on the legacy of love to a new generation. And that was a recipe worth keeping. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. What would you have done in Rachel's position? Should she have revealed the truth about James to Nathan sooner, or was she right to protect her son from William's influence? Let us know in the comments.